Thanks so much for coming today. I'm David Lankes. I'm the director of the School of Library and Information Science, and today I'll be working with Professor Ernest Wiggins of Journalism and Mass Communications. And this is a topic of great interest currently in the country, currently around, and certainly among both of our programs. One of the reasons that this really is a good way of collaborating is it truly spans the issues from how do our communities make good decisions with the information available to them, whether that's through reporting, whether that's through media, news channel, whether that's through libraries, information centers, analysts, etc. So it's a topic that is of great concern. One of the other things that we really want to do is we are organizing this session around leadership and undergraduate leadership is really to not simply say, okay, that's what it is, or can we come up with definitions, but really to move to the idea of what do we do about it. And so what we're doing roughly, and Professor Wiggins will go through the schedule in a moment, is roughly talk a little bit about what's the issue. How do we conceptualize it? What are some of the topics? Fake news has used everything from a liberal conspiracy to an invective against CNN. Is there some way of us understanding this at a little deeper level? And so we're going to really work through those concepts. And then, what are we going to do about it? And we're going to talk about the idea of possibly Magellan scholarships, undergraduate research, independent studies, etc. So we want to think about action, which is truly, I think, one of the signatures of the College of Information and Communications. Not just acknowledging something, but seeking to make it better. So with that, I will turn it over to my esteemed colleague, and I will sit and learn with the rest of us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lankes, and welcome everyone. I'm going to be approaching my part of the presentation from the perspective of a former journalist who is now a member of the faculty here. And so a lot of the examples I'll be sharing with you are ones that I've encountered over the years. And they're not necessarily what we would define as fake news. We'll get to that later. What we may want to define it as is news that is not really doing what it's supposed to do. That may be blurring the lines between what we would consider to be facts and what we might consider to be opinion. So that's what we're going to be talking about at the first. And I'll be going to an example of a fake news controversy. And then at the end, I will be turning it back over to Dr. Lankes. But so this is the agenda then for the first hour. So I'll be walking us through some exercises, and please do feel free to chime in. I will certainly want to hear your thoughts about what we're going to be looking at on the slides. And then in the second half of it, Dr. Lankes is going to be guiding us through some ideas and brainstorming on how we can actually take perhaps what I've laid down as a foundation and turn it into a workable project. And then we would actually, I think, like to hear back from you, of course, after we've gone through all of this in a couple of weeks. And if you've got some ideas, particularly if you want to do a Magellan scholarship or fellowship or something like that, to hear about that and maybe help facilitate that for you. Okay? Let's see if my clicker will work here. Good. Okay, so let's start with establishing something that I really do believe. That fake news did not just arrive on our porches one morning. It says, fake news, this is fake news. I think the idea has been around for a while. And we're familiar with fake news. We've been familiar with fake news forever. Those of us who have ever been in a grocery store, for example, we know that fake news was at the end of the counter where you bought the chocolates and the gum, right? I mean, oftentimes it was called the news of the world or the National Enquirer or something like that. But you know, the thing back then is that we knew it was fake. We knew that Bat Boy didn't really exist, that this person wasn't really abducted by aliens. It was labeled as fake news. People bought it. Some people even subscribed to the National Enquirer, if you can imagine that. But they probably don't get it for its information. They get it for another purpose, maybe entertainment, right? Which is different from what we're seeing these days. So even before its elevation to what we call a cultural phenomenon and a research topic, right? It had been discussed by those who teach and practice journalism, fake news or news that was being, something that was being presented as news but wasn't really true to the traditions of news. Some have argued that fake news, and what we're seeing now as fake news is a result of what we call the dilution of core journalism principles. And so some of those principles were itemized, discussed thoroughly in Kovac and Rosensteel's book, The Elements of Journalism. I pulled out 3 here that I think are relevant. In that book, they talked about the core journalism's first obligation is to truth, which of course is what we're going to be talking about in this session, and then loyalty to citizens. You cannot be loyal to a citizenry if what you're doing is lying to them or perpetuating falsehood. Right? If you're not being loyal to them, loyal to the idea of citizenship, loyal to the idea of healthy public discourse, so forth. And the last thing is the essence is the discipline of verification, and they really do nail this idea of verifying what you're presenting to people, of making sure that it's been corroborated, that what you feel is fact is indeed established in some verifiable way as fact. They're arguing that these have been eroded over time, and that there have been shortcuts that have been incorporated into news reports, and that when that started, that ultimately what we've ended up with is this whole phenomenon of fake news, and we'll talk more specifically about that later. They argue in this book that the departure from these and other standards have led to what was called the fractured state of 21st century journalism. I highly recommend this book, The Elements of Journalism, for those who are interested in more on this topic. So, our discussion of fake news can begin with an examination of what I call a related phenomenon, and that is the merging of fact and opinion in news reports. So let's look at some statements that some of them could be what we would call leads, that is a first line or first sentence in a news story, or something that could appear in a news story. It could be in a local newspaper, it could be online, it could be presented in a news program on television or some other medium. So what I would like for us to do as we go through these statements, I know there's a lot of copy here, but I want you to think about a couple of things as we go through these statements. I want you to keep in mind that a statement of fact is provable through some objective means and can be demonstrated by evidence. That's a fact. For example, the U.S. population grew by 10% from 2000 to 2010. It can be provable through census data, right? That's a fact. An opinion cannot be demonstrated by evidence, no matter how strongly it's stated or how fervently it's believed. For example, American college students are the most attractive in the world. We may actually believe that, but of course there's no objective way to prove that, right? And of course I would think that the Swedes would probably argue, or some other country, all right? This is an opinion. But what we find is so often that the lines get blurred. And when the lines get blurred, then people are left wondering, so what am I to believe? What am I to walk away with? What's the takeaway from this statement? Okay, so let's look at a few. How about this one? The University of South Carolina Gamecocks have yet to deliver what their fans really want: aggressive, no-holds-barred basketball. Fact or opinion? I'm asking, which would you think? Fact or opinion?
Opinion. Say opinion.
And where is that? And you say that because what? Because why? Is it provable objectively, or is it rooted basically in something that's unprovable? Which can it be proven objectively?
No, because we don't know what the answer is.
Right. If you were going to go about it, how would you prove it? How would you establish the truth of this factually true? What would you have to do? How many?
The entire Gamecock.
Yeah. And what I often seen is that is not close to what has been done to get to this statement. Y'all follow me?
You would have to also define what is aggressive and what is no holds
That's
barred.
all of those kinds of things. That's right. And so the language that is being used here as descriptively, it may not translate the same from one person to the next. So if I ask you, aggressive, no holds barred, you may believe that it's one thing, the next person may believe it's something else. It's going to be hard to establish this as fact, right? What about this? Columbia residents will see a 5% increase in the water bills next year.
That's bad.
Yeah, you can establish that because of some action that was taken by the Columbia City Council, to raise the rates and so forth. So it's objectively provable. All right. How about this one? Franklin D. Roosevelt was the most loved and most despised president in U.S. history. Sorry. Okay. Oh yeah. Is there any way to even approach this as fact? Because could you make an attempt at it? Could you, if you were going to?
Yes.
How would you go about it?
Well, it depends. So you could look at opinion polling data, but that only goes back so far, right? So you probably get it from I'm not really an expert at pollsters, but when did Gallup do his first poll? In the 30s. So I guess it would start with Roosevelt. So you could do since Roosevelt, but you could use media sampling, going back and looking at opinion pieces in newspapers going back to the founding of the country, and do like essentially media coverage.
Do you think that they did that kind of polling for George Washington?
No, but I mean, you could look at like media coverage of George Washington and extrapolate based off of that, for instance.
And would in doing that, would you have to rely on some kind of interpretation of the reporting and make some? It would be feel kind of difficult if what you're doing is making a broad statement in all of U.S. history that this one president is going to come out to be whatever methods that you use, provably the most loved and at the same time the most despised president. It's going to be fairly difficult.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that this is actually where it seems that it's almost polemical, that what you're trying to do is make a statement and then you're going to develop the statement probably in a column of some sort. But somebody might walk away from this, someone who's not schooled, as you are, might walk away from this and think that this is actually a statement of fact when it's difficult to prove, right? How about this? The University of South Carolina's push to raise admission standards have resulted in a 5% increase in student enrollment. Sorry? Go with it. Let me hear it. Why?
Because you have to prove that every effort that the subject has done has in fact resulted in actually increasing. It's not just because of the rising population or something.
Right. So what's the correlation that's being suggested here may not actually be the correlation in truth. Right? We actually may want to believe this and go, yes, what we have decided to do has really had a positive impact, but there may be other variables that haven't been controlled for. Right? Do y'all see statements like this? And so, do you think there's a danger in statements like this? We're not getting into fake news now, are we? This is not fake news. Sorry? Yeah, well, it's something that's actually used probably not necessarily for information, but maybe to persuade, right? To get people to think positively about your school, right? So, we got to be careful about these kinds of things. What about this? The mayor believes the time has arrived for a change in government. If there's a problem with this, where is the problem?
In this quoting, right?
Go with that. Let me hear more.
Like, if he said, I think we need to change the government, that's a quote, he said it, so he thinks it, but he's like, well, maybe we should just, like, tweak this aspect of some policy, and they say, oh, he wants to change the government.
Okay, you made a very good and important distinction. What the mayor said, and the assumption that what he said he believes. Right? Do we know that? Do politicians sometimes say things that they don't believe?
Okay.
So what we have done is that we have heard a statement, and that we have attributed that to some kind of belief system within the person who made the statement. And is that our job as journalists? No. So what we need to do is be careful and use language like the mayor said today, the time has arrived for a change in government. Do y'all hear journalists attribute beliefs and feelings to public figures? The president feels. The candidate believes, right? I'm sorry? Yes. And it adds some weight, but it certainly does suggest that there's a prescience or clairvoyance or something that's going on in the mind of the journalist that none of the rest of us are privy to. That we can actually see into the mind and the heart of a politician, and God, who wants to go there? So let's stick with observable fact. What he said, right? Like this. The mayor said innovative programming would alleviate some of the city's money woes. Fact, opinion. Fact or opinion here, which is, this is a fact. This is an opinion. Y'all follow me? Do you see how, if this goes unabated, how we end up with problems in the media presentations and in news? American women have made gains in the corporate world while losing ground in the battle over reproductive rights.
False correlation.
Let's start with fact or opinion. Fact or opinion. Now sometimes what we have are statements that may merge the two, as we did with one of the earlier statements.
Like a sentence.
Sorry?
Seems like opinion.
And if there's an opinion here, where is it grounded? In what language would you say?
The feeling that the statement is trying to. It doesn't feel like a pure factual statement, even though it may be true. Those statements are true, but even put together, it kind of decides.
Where would the truth be? How would we measure the truth of this, the gains in the corporate world? How would we measure the truths?
Probably also
Employment of women in corporate professions, in careers, okay. Gains in that regard. How about this one, losing ground?
hard to prove that. Like, how would you prove that?
It's hard to prove this or this.
The second one, because you have to look at policy.
Well, you also have to agree on what is it that's being lost or gained, and are all women on the same side in this battle? Y'all with me? There's an assumption at the root here, right? Which is what? What is the assumption here? Yes, that all women agree and are on the same side. And we know that that's not true, right? So why would we make a statement like this? Because we're making an assumption. You're making an assumption about your readers, perhaps. Perhaps you're making an assumption about their political viewpoints, so forth and so on. And this is the erosion that I'm talking about here. But it grabs you. And depending on your publication, you actually may be calling it right of what your readers expect. But that's not your job, right? A Clemson student was arrested Friday for assaulting a professor who had failed him on a midterm. Sorry? Okay. Sorry? This is probably where we're safest when we're talking about the fact of it, right? If someone has been arrested for something, and we got to be careful with this, what we just certainly don't want to do is that before they go to trial, we certainly don't want to convict them. And where's the conviction here?
I think it should have been separated to say that he didn't assault him because, but you assume that in your head, like just reading through it quickly, this is the reason he was assaulted.
Right, this is what he's been accused of. This is where the conviction is, isn't it? The for. He's accused of this. This is fact. We've got that documented, but it has yet to be established whether he actually did it for this reason. Y'all with me? Scrupulously fair. We have to be scrupulously fair in this country when it comes to these kinds of matters. This is sloppy, but it happens all the time. Y'all think? Person's arrested, we use language like this, we assume in our heads that he's guilty. Otherwise, why would they arrest him? How many people have been arrested and were innocent? Right? It happens all the time. How many people have been convicted and are innocent? I won't say it happens all the time, but it happens too often. Okay? Be careful, scrupulously careful. How about this one? 7 out of 10 American college students have a problem with binge drinking. Sorry?
It's vague because you have to find out that you have
Some of them don't have any problem with binge drinking. They do it quite well. Talk to me about this. What's in your head when you see stats like this report? 7 out of 10, 4 out of 5. What? Yeah.
Personally, I would have liked to see 70% instead of that, just because it's, I don't know, non-linear. And then, like she mentioned, the problem with binge drinking, I feel like that needs to be defined, like in terms of how many drinks per hour and what the problem is.
Yes.
Remember it's like alcoholism, is that something that's done medically?
I'm not sure if those are synonymous.
They're not, but I would say that would maybe believe that it's more of a factual statement. They used it more.
Yeah. When you see things like this graphically depicted, with a story like this, and you've got 10 figures, 7 of them were red, 3 of them were blue, right? That is supposed to be, that's a graphic depiction of this 7 out of 10, right? Now, when you see that, do you imagine that wherever you can find a group of American college students that 7 out of 10 would apply. It would not be the case, but you think that the average person walking on the campus of the University of South Carolina after seeing this says, every 10, any random 10, 7 of them are going to have a problem with binge drinking. That is actually what's being suggested. Am I right? Would that vary depending on the school?
Yes.
Is that contained in this statement? It's a broad, very broad statement that I think opens up, when it's done too often, opens up the possibility for all kinds of confusion and conclusions and all kinds of false beliefs in readers and viewers. Y'all follow me? We're going down the slope to fake news eventually. The University of South Carolina freshman class for 2016 was the largest and smartest in the school's history. This actually is a mix, isn't it? So what part of it is testable and measurable fact, and what part of it is untestable opinion? Yes?
The largest and smartest could both be testable. In fact, we had the numbers of enrollment and then like SAT, ACT scores, but you could have, I don't think smartest is probably, his English qualifying.
Or the ones that had the highest,
You could just simply say highest test score.
Yes, because you may not have agreement in your readership or your viewership of what this means. But we're making a judgment here, aren't we? That there's a correlation between your SAT score, ACT scores, whatever, and smartness. But do we see this statement made? Not necessarily about the University of South Carolina, but about any school. We see it all the time. And we embrace it. And I guess what I'm getting to here is that what we need to do is certainly let's not mix the observable with the measurable with something that's not measurable. Let's certainly not do that, because then that causes all kinds of confusion. Fake news is not all fake. The charges of fake news are sometimes attached to stories that are 90% true with some problems, but then they paint the whole story as being fake. We'll look at an example of that in a second. How about this one? Hip-hop culture has permeated every aspect of American life and is gaining acceptance in Middle Eastern countries as well. How do you prove what? All of it? Yeah.
What does permeated mean?
What is it about our use of words like every and all and most in journalistic writing when there hasn't been the rigor demonstrated in gaining proof or verifying this to support that every aspect of anything has been permeated? But we use this all the time. It's this inflated, exaggerated, hyperbolic kind of language that we use in journalistic writing that does no one any good. And you know what? I see it in my students' writing all the time. You know how many times I read how amazing the world is? Everything's amazing. Do y'all find that? It's amazing. Everything's amazing. We're a tribe we live in a world of hyperbole. Yes, sir, Dr.
I just want to make sure that you saw it in all of your students, all the time.
That's right. All of them every day.
Every day.
All the
my
time. That's right. There's not I don't get any relief. Right. But this is something. What I'm getting at here is that this is everywhere. These kinds, and I don't think the people who write this mean any harm. And of course, we know that certain fake news is malicious, but some isn't. Is created and disseminated for other purposes. It's not malicious, and I don't think this is meant to be malicious either. It's being used to hype the story, to give it perhaps more relevance and more currency, right? But we don't need to go there with it. How about this one? A Lexington County man has pleaded guilty to the brutal assault of his wife on Christmas Eve. Fact, opinion, merging of the two.
I think it's a little merging, like it could be fact that he did in fact plead guilty, but I don't think the word brutal was necessary because that could affect the way people think about it.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when you use when journalists are using descriptive language like this in order to, perhaps to pump up the horror or the urgency of something, then they actually are sacrificing something about incredibility, aren't they? Now here's a trick. My recommendation is leave it out, of course. But if you wanted to keep it in, put it in quotation marks, if and only if there's certain condition pertain. What condition, if I put in quotation marks, what condition would need to pertain in order for that to fly?
Like a police report stating that.
Someone had to say it. Absolutely. And if that wasn't the case, and you put it into in quotation marks, what might someone walk away believing the statement that you're making in doing so, if it wasn't clear?
Abusive, and it could have been an accident.
Or something else, that you're being something else. When people do this, do y'all do this? Yeah, you're being ironic, aren't you? And you certainly don't want to suggest that you're being ironic here. Am I being clear? So my point is, when you see stories that use what I would call this kind of descriptive language to describe things that are observable and that are approvable, that we have documentation for. Be careful of this. It may not. No harm was meant. No harm was meant, but maybe harm was done. You follow? Yeah. No harm was meant, but maybe harm was done by this. Okay. Am I making sense? Do y'all see these? Okay. So, fact and opinion. Fact and opinion. All right. Let's go to a test case then. Let's bring it down to a story that came to my attention the other day. I don't usually go trolling for fake news. There's plenty of real stuff out there that I find interesting. But I did come across this in Breitbart.
Oh.
Of all places. And it's not a fake news story. It's a story charging another story with being fake. A story in the Atlantic is being described by the author of this piece, Thomas D. Williams, as being fake. A story on sonograms and this idea that the author in the Atlantic story was purporting that it was being abused at one point. Okay, so let's look at some language here, can we? And I'll try to pump this up a little bit, if I can. The Atlantic Monthly magazine had to scramble Tuesday to repeatedly amend a new article against ultrasound technology that spoke of fetal heartbeats as quote-unquote imaginary and denied that unborn babies are alive. Okay? Before we get into the rest of it, do you sense a tone? And describe it for me, if you would. You sense a tone? Is it a tone of investigation, discovery, or is it a tone of accusation?
Condescending.
Okay, where do you find that in the language?
The fact that it says scramble, like the Atlantic magazine is not a professional organization.
Yes.
They had to keep fixing things, and then the way that they phrased the imaginary implication, as you said, kind of evokes a sarcastic tone.
And we'll see in a second that they're borrowing that from other postings that they are referencing here. But yeah, word choice does indeed suggest an attitude and a position on the part of Thomas D. Williams, PhD. Well, let's see who Dr. Williams is. Clicking on that, and we see that he is a regular contributor to Breitbart, and this is his brief bio here. He's a professor of ethics. He's got degrees in economics, philosophy, and theology. He calls himself an amateur mixologist. I don't know how that factors in, but he's a certified sommelier as well. Again, permanent research fellow at the Center for Ethics and Culture at Notre Dame. And he's the Breitbart Rome bureau chief. And if you go through and see the kinds of stories that he's written, he does seem to have a position, and a lot of it seems to be aligned, you would expect if he's at Notre Dame, aligned perhaps with Catholic theology. Okay, so there seems to be here with a suggestion at least that he has a viewpoint. When you have a viewpoint, and journalists have viewpoints, journalists have alignments, journalists have opinions, right? When you have those, the expectation of the reader is that you're going to set those aside. And you're going to try scrupulously hard in order to be fair. You're not going to display your position by using words like this. But maybe this is what's expected at Breitbart. So, when a series of observers pointed out the many flagrant falsehoods in the story, the Atlantic issued a formal retraction of the statement that there is, quote, no heart to speak of, unquote, in a 6-week-old fetus. Nonetheless, it merely changed its provocative subtitle without comment. Quote, the technology has been used to create an imaginary, this is where the imaginary is, heartbeat and sped up videos that falsely depict a response to stimulus. What is good and healthy, I think, in this presentation is the links to these items, so that you, if you're going to make a determination of fake news, or if it's not fake news, go and test it yourself. So here's the article in the Atlantic, and you can go and you can make a determination yourself if you feel that the writer here, Maura Weigel, has overstepped her bounds. And clearly, if what Breitbart is stating is true, clearly they did draw some conclusions and make some statements here that needed to be retracted or clarified at a later date. All right. But go back and read the story, the original story that's being questioned, that's being criticized at this point, and come to your own conclusion. And while you're over here, let's see if there's some information we can get on this writer. So the writer is a doctoral candidate in comparative literature at Yale University. She's the author of Labor of Love, The Invention of Dating. Don't know exactly how that relates to this particular topic, but there it is. And then we have a couple of other stories about her. So I guess what I'm modeling here or demonstrating here is that you used the resources that are here to plow deep, to drill a little bit deeper and to find out who it is you're talking about, who it is that's at the heart of this particular controversy. Let's go back to this story then, if I can.
Okay.
This one here. Right. There you go. All right, thank you. So the observers that are referred to here, when a series of observers pointed out, who are those observers? There we are. The Stream. Not familiar with this publication, but this is one of the ones that's where we're taking with that link. The Atlantic called fetal heartbeats imaginary. Twitter responded, and then kind of a description here of what the problems were that this particular writer, who is pictured here, Liberty Mercator, what she thought. And let's find out a little bit more about her, if we can. Staff writer for The Stream, all right? Bachelor's degree in journalism from Patrick Henry College. Previously worked in DC at WMAL and at the First Liberty Institute in Plano, Texas. She resides in Dallas-Fort Worth with her husband and their beloved cat, so forth. All right, so that's a little bit about her, and then some stories that she has been attached to previously. So you get a sense of who she is and maybe what her predilections are, what her viewpoints are. And then also, as we scroll down here, other people who have chimed in about this particular article. Ross Anderson, who is that? You have a description of him here. John Pirates, description of him as well. And so if you don't do this with stories that come across your news feed, that people recommend to you, that you somehow come across, if you don't go drill down deep like this, please start to do that so that you are more informed about the positions of people, the positions and viewpoints of people who are commenting on the accuracy or the veracity of certain news that's circulating out there, and see that maybe they have some skin in the game, that maybe they have viewpoints to promote, maybe they have an agenda. That's directing their comments. Sean Davis, the commenter here. How the X-ray pushed the idea that we all have a skeleton. We click on him. We see that from his page here, that he is the co-founder of the Federalist, data junkie, presidential campaign vet, former chief instigator for Senator Tom Coburn. It's his description. He's a Wharton graduate. But let's go to the Federalist. And we can see what kinds of news of reporting, perhaps viewpoints that they promote on the Federalist as well. Give an idea of what his agenda is. Going back is Sean. And you can continue to do that for as many of these that are listed here, informing yourself on what's being presented. Let's go back. A little bit more of this language. This is from the Breitbart. It also silently expunged other embarrassing errors in the piece, such as calling John Kasich the governor of Indiana. Time for publication just before the massive March for Life in Washington, D.C. for the anniversary of Supreme Court's Roe v. Wade decision. The article, and they list her name here, attempts to show how ultrasounds of unborn children have no discernible effect on women's choice to carry the baby to term. Even the amended piece contains outright lies, taking the Atlantic's fake news to a whole new level. Now, I'm going to stop for a minute. I want to get your sense of when the term fake news is used, what comes to mind? How do you operationalize that? None of it is true? Is that typically how you process it? Or most of it is true? Some of it isn't? How do you process that? Have you gotten to that point in dealing with this term? Fake news. All of it's fake? Most of it? Can one thing be wrong and it be fake news? Talk to me.
I think motivation and an attempt to persuade with partial or incomplete or erroneous information.
So the intent factors in for your definition. Now the Onion, fake news, right? Okay, not to inform, to entertain, right? And that's their purpose. And they're assuming, because they broadcasted that they're parody, that people will know that. What happens, however, is that sometimes pieces out of the Onion are clipped and shared with other people, right? Without being labeled as such. And causes all kinds of confusion. And maybe that was my intent, that I wanted to cause confusion.
But if you step outside the US, I received some from that.
Yes.
Folks who don't know that publication is what it is, they actually take that information and they did it on face value.
Yes.
So they have no idea the intention is entertaining it. They believe it is on the way, but it's global in nature. So
Does that then, in that context, make it fake?
no, it's not.
Jon Stewart used to advertise that
This
his
is the fake news.
program in the evening was fake news, but when people started taking it seriously, it morphed into a show where people were actually taking information as though it were true.
Did he ever, well, I didn't watch him that often, but you can inform me, did he ever fabricate events and comment on them? Or did he simply turn actual events comedic? Do you know what I mean?
Certainly did be.
Okay. That there are actual events that happened, and he just made comical response to them.
From a point of view,
Right.
it's very apparent.
Did he ever stage fake events and try to pass them off as such?
No.
Does anybody?
No.
Johnston? Don't think so? Yeah.
You might twist it actually.
assuming perhaps that people knew the actual event had transpired, and so they had context, because otherwise it wouldn't even be funny. Right? Am I following that? So I take your point. I think it's really important. If the Atlantic is being charged with fake news, what the writer of this article and what this publication is trying to suggest is that errors that they made or conclusions that they drew that were perhaps rushed or ill-considered illegitimizes the whole piece and makes it all fake, right? And I'm not a fan of this publication or the editor, but it seems to me that's a stretch. And it seems to me that actually what they're trying to do is promote a case that the problems with the article don't really support. Does that happen? All the time. Yes.
I was just gonna say that, like, it almost seems like fake news is plausible. Like, it needs to be plausible, right?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about what like actually constitutes fake news in the election cycle, there were two types, arguably. Well, maybe three generally. So you had external propaganda, you had internal propaganda, which is like essentially partisan acts spreading fake news, and you had like profiteering fake news. So you had all the websites in Macedonia that started out as motorcycle sites and slowly morphed into generating fake news about the election.
Right.
And so propaganda obviously has very specific purposes and is really well defined.
Yes.
So the internal and the external, but the third type of the essentially plausible fabrications, they're plausible, so there are some elements of truth to them,
yes.
essentially, but the core of what they're talking about was oftentimes non-existent at all.
Yes.
And
made out of whole cloth? They're just, yes.
Yeah, and the reason that I feel like the reason why they work so well is because if you look at like the website right now that's up on the screen, they look the same. But not necessarily like they were branded as Breitbart, but I mean they had the same advertising. And the difference is that the kids in Macedonia don't have to pay journalists because they're just making stuff up.
Right.
So in this model, the advertising is not necessarily super profitable, but in their model it was super profitable because they could just sit around and type up a story about Hillary Clinton's email servers that never really have.
They didn't really have to pay any staff to do anything.
And they didn't have to pay any staff for it,
right.
So they only have to pay hosting fees.
Since you have the floor, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
The journalist who was in the press pool who assumed that Dr. King's bust had been removed after the president had moved in,
yeah.
and shared that as part of the press pool. Of course, we don't know what his heart was. We don't know what he was thinking. But was that fake news?
I mean, what did the order did the story get retracted?
Eventually.
Yeah. So I mean, if the
was the initial dissemination of it fake news? It has been called fake news since then, and is basically used as a means to beat up on the press corps.
Yeah.
Was the initial reporting of it, the sharing of the mistake, fake news in your mind?
I mean, I think if anything, it probably falls more into the
we screwed
propaganda.
up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because the publication published it assuming that what the reporter had said was true,
and many people picked up on it. Rest. Do you remember reading it in your news feeds?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
did you believe it?
No.
Those of you who saw it.
Well,
do you remember believing whether the new president had moved the bust of Martin Luther King out of the?
I didn't believe it just because it sounded really, really partisan, really stupid to do. So
So you gave the president the benefit of the doubt, and you doubted whether the reporting was accurate?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it would have been kind of insensitive.
Why would you do it?
Yeah, but then.
Is Donald Trump.
Yes, true. Which actually gave us some credence. Okay, let's back up for a second. What if the member of the press corps went in looking for a problem, looking for trouble, looking for evidence that change was not that the change that was coming was not as benevolent? Then we get down to the whole thing about intent. So if I'm going in and I'm looking for problems, I didn't see the bus there. What the result was that people were standing in front of the place where it was. I didn't see it. I'm going to report that I didn't see it, and it takes on a life of its own. Fake news or just a mistake?
You could have asked.
And that's what the charge has been, what has evolved to. Why didn't you ask? So fake news or incompetence?
I mean, incompetence, really.
And are they compatible? I mean, are they synonymous?
No, but they might lead together.
Okay. And so if I create this through my own incompetence, if I create this incident that then takes on its own life or another life because people take it and then do with it what they will, share it around. Don't you see what the president has done now? Then it may eventually become fake news. Was originally something else, less than that, but eventually becomes fake news. Am I making sense? This thing, it's organic. It kind of takes on a life of its own. So how should we respond to it? What do you think the intent of this is? To shame the Atlantic Monthly? Or to correct the error? What do you think? If you had to guess, what do you think that the Dr. Thomas D. Williams's intent for this article?
This is information warfare.
Go with that. I want to hear more.
So, I mean, Beaver News has a very explicit ideological bias that is aggressively right-wing and anti-left, and they sort of enjoy poking fun of, and part of their modus operandi is poking fun of and undermining the credibility of liberal establishment magazines and figures.
And what supports that description, that characterization that you said? How will we come, if we were new to this, how will we come to that conclusion? Is there anything that we could have done here that would support that observation?
No, we have to go and look about, search for news about Beaver, or Breitbart, news.
But also, it's kind of buried in here too, with the author of this and what his apparent agenda is, the people who they quote, the sources, and so forth. I mean, the evidence is here.
Yeah.
If you drill deep enough into it to find that, that's the point I wanted to make about that earlier.
Yeah.
Right. So it's warfare. You suggested that this is kind of information warfare. They're trying to build their capital.
Yeah.
Right part is
Take down the enemy's capital.
take down the. Okay. Yeah. Now, I don't think the Atlantic is going to say that we stand 100% behind this article. They certainly aren't doing that because they're correcting the mistakes.
Yeah.
But that's what news publications and organizations do when they make a mistake. They correct them.
Yeah.
If they didn't correct it, if they let it stand, then it probably would be more evidence or support for this charge of fake news. If they were simply going to perpetuate the errors and not want to correct them. This is just a model of a way that I think, and I'm going to close out here and turn things over to Dr. Lankes, of how to drill down into a story that seems to be disputed, of a controversy, of something that's being charged as fake news, to see what exactly the situation is. But let me leave you with a couple of thoughts. Just as you watch your dietary intake, I'm suggesting that you watch your intake from your intake with media, with news media. Explore facts that are presented. If they're presented cogently, explore them deliberately, and acknowledge opinions of others as they appear, but keep them separate and understand what measurements or what evidence needs to be presented if something is going to be considered a fact. And of course, you don't actually need that. What you can do, you're free to agree or disagree with opinions, but particularly with facts, weigh those carefully. You would do well, I think, to give greater weight in your decision making about where you stand with a particular article, a particular set of facts, or something that's being presented with what's provable. The other things that have happened in terms of journalism is the use of anonymous sourcing. Is particularly now when there seems to be limited access to some corridors of power, where they're relying on people who were there in the meeting to share some information that was privy to them and not identifying those people are, that can erode confidence in the information. There was something that I actually ran today. Some charge that the president had told our president, Donald Trump, had told the president of Mexico that if you don't clean up your hombres, we're going to come down here and clean them up for you. Did y'all see that? Some charge, and then there was a retraction.
Yeah.
Within 24 hours. So there was supposedly some kind of a conversation between the two presidents that was then subsequently disavowed. So it's a crazy world.